Now, we want to create the input of a mining structure for our algorithm. The first step in this environment is determining the data source. So, the first thing you do is to determine where your data comes from. You have to tell the algorithm where to get its data from. To do so, we gotta define the data mining association rule database we prepared before as the data source. This is the same database we just talked about in the SQL Server environment. Here, in the Visual Studio environment, we should also determine what data to build a model on, so we determine the data source at first. To create a data source, we right-click on Data Sources and select New Data Source. Then the Data Source wizard opens, where you just have to click Next. In the Data Source wizard window that opens, we select the second option and click on this button, New. The Connection Manager opens. This is where you should determine the name of your server so that it connects to it. I select my server here, and at the bottom, I can see the list of its databases. I select the Data Mining Association Rule database. Here, we say that our data source is this specific database. The next thing to do is to click on Test Connection to make sure there's a good connection between the server and data source. If everything's fine and there's a stable connection, I click on OK. The next step is to select the Use this service account option. Then we click on Finish. So far, we determined the data source and selected a name for it, which is Data Mining Association Rule. You could choose any name you like. We'll need this name in the next step. The second step is to create a DSV. A DSV is a graphical demonstration of the existing objects. In fact, it demonstrates the data source you already defined in a graphical form. There, you can see the tables of your database and the relationships between them graphically. So at this stage, we create a DSV. To create a DSV, we right-click on Data Source Views and select the first option, which is New Data Source View. Then, the Data Source View wizard opens, where you just have to click Next. In the next window, you gotta introduce the data source you just created to the DSV. If you remember, I chose the same name for the data source and the database, which is the Data Mining Association Rule. At this step, we click on this data source. Of course, if you haven't already created and defined the data source, you could do it in this window too. You just have to click on New Data Source. The Data Source wizard window opens, where you can determine and create a data source. So I hit Cancel here and Continue. Well, we determined the data source, so we click Next. In the next window, we gotta select the views we need. We have two tables in this database, and we need both of them, so we should add both to the projects. To do this, all we gotta do is click on this button, and you see that both tables are transferred to the right. Then, we click on Next. In the end, we determine a name for our DSV. I'm gonna use the name Data Mining Association Rule for the DSV2, and hit Finish. As you see, my DSV is created, and the DSV is nothing but a graphic demonstration of the existing objects. So this is it. This was the second step in the Visual Studio environment. And now, let's go to the third step in this tool. Up to here, we created both the data source and the DSV. The third step we gotta do in the Visual Studio environment is to build our mining structure. This is the main work and where we determine the algorithm and its inputs and outputs. Just like the last step, we gotta move along with the process. We right-click on Mining Structure in the Solution Explorer window and select New Mining Structure. Alright, the Data Mining Wizard window opens now, where we should click on Next. In the next window, we gotta select the method for mining structure, which can be from the relative database, data warehouse, or cube. I'm gonna select the first option and click Next. Now, we gotta select the algorithm we're gonna use in the project, which is the Microsoft Association Rule. I select the algorithm and click on Next. Now, it asks us where this association rule algorithm should get its data from. From this DSV you have already created. Now you better understand why we did what we did in the previous steps. Now that you have determined your DSV, you gotta determine which table is the case and which is the nested case. If you've paid attention from the beginning, you should know why we need the case and the nested case tables. You probably guessed that we should consider the order info table as the case and the order details table as the nested case. We go forward and continue the work. In the next window, you see the tables and their fields, and you gotta determine and arrange the columns that are going to be used in your analysis. At this stage, you should determine 3 things: the table keys, what fields are going to be considered as the algorithm's input, and finally, what field is your output, based on which the prediction should be made. Here, we consider the 2 fields of model and order number as our table keys. What do I want as the algorithm's input? I ask it to consider the customer's income as the input in the patterns it creates. I hit input here, and it selects it on the other side as well. Then I ask it to consider the purchased items as nested keys in the nested table, since the purchased items are the key to our analysis. If you don't understand this part, make sure to rewind and watch it again. I determined the nested key here, and I ask it to predict the outputs I want. Predict the items a customer is going to buy, or give me the new patterns that are forming in my items as the outputs. You select these. Now I hit next. It tells me which variable is discrete and which can be what. Here, if you determine which variables are key. It figures it out itself to some extent, but you could correct its mistakes or change content types. I hit next and determine the percentages for train and test. Now we accept these percentages. If you want to have the drill through capability to get the details of data, you can determine it here. You choose a name for it too. I'm going to select the same name I've been using and hit finish. So the model is built and the mining structure is built. Alright, so far we created the mining structure and built a model based on the association rule algorithm. We proceeded and determined some fields as the inputs in the mining structure that are going to have effects on our model. The thing we got to do now is to deploy the model on the OLAP database we have, so we should make the deployment adjustments. To do so, we right-click on the project through the Solution Explorer window and select the last option from the menu that opens, which is Properties. Then we select the Deployment option. In the window that opens, we gotta select our server in the server section. Since I'm working on a personal computer, I adjust the server on localhost and click OK. Alright, let's go to the deploy environment. To do so, we right-click on the project again and choose Deploy. There are a series of patterns forming here that we can see in this tab, the Mining Model Reviewer, and see what they are. Look, when it's processing, it's actually being trained. In other words, the processing is the same as training here. Alright, so I bring the model viewer up. We have a couple of tabs here, including Rules, Item Set, and Dependency Network. You gotta familiarize yourself with these concepts too. So let's go back to the slides and explain them.